Hey people, what's up? Hart here. So recently I was looking back at some of the very first beats I made in Ableton as a tiny baby beginner music producer, and yeah, they were pretty trash. But I picked up on 5 big mistakes I was making at the time that now that I've fixed them, my beat making has gotten so much better. So hopefully by sharing these tips with you, you'll avoid making the same mistakes as me. So on that note, let's hop right into the list. Okay, mistake number 1, using way too much reverb. So the first thing I didn't understand about reverb or audio effects in general at the time was the concept of putting it directly on a channel strip versus putting it on a send or return track. And if you're brand new and you don't understand what any of this stuff is so far, I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. So if we put reverb directly on a track, what it's going to do is it's actually going to change your dry signal. And a dry signal is basically just your sound from an instrument, whether it's a virtual instrument like this one or a guitar that you're plugging in. Your dry signal is whatever sound you're making without any effects processing on it. And conversely, a wet signal is after it's been processed with different audio effects. So I have this electric piano, and right now it basically has no reverb because this mix knob basically the same as a dry wet knob, and it says 0 right now. So if I turn this up, so now this is 100% wet. And you can hear that that piano has lost all of its attack. It's super washed out, super ambient, very pushed back in the mix. And that can be great if that's the kind of vibe you're going for. If you're going for more of an ambient style, you want it to be, pushed farther back in the mix rather than in your face. Putting it on the channel strip can be a great option. So the other option is to put it on a return track, which basically allows you to keep your dry signal and it mixes that wet signal along with the dry signal. It's a lot more subtle than putting it right on the channel strip. So if I play that same piano and I'll just gradually send all of that to the reverb. So it's still keeping all of the attack of the original signal, but we're still getting some nice reverb. So it really depends what kind of track you're making and what style you're going for. For pianos and stuff like this, I do still tend to put it on the channel a lot of the time. But back when I was first making beats, like literally it would be 100%, no EQ, nothing. And it would just sound, everything would sound washed out. So always dial this back till it's, a little bit more reasonable. Vintage Verb has a really nice, easy to understand EQ system. I always like to leave it somewhere around here because I don't like to send reverb to the very bottom frequencies because they can get super muddy, and same with the highs as well. If you don't have something like Vintage Verb that has an easy to read EQ, you can always put it on a return track as well and just slap an EQ8 or whatever EQ you want on there and create your own EQ after your reverb. Mistake number 2, not using automation. So automating different parameters can be a really great way to create interest and movement in your beats. In my last video on my cinematic lo-fi, I showed how I automated the gain on a few of my different pads to kind of create some movement and just make them flow a little bit better. But you can also, if you're just starting, an auto filter is a great thing to automate the frequency. Because it's a really great way to either add energy or take away energy for transitions. Here I have it on my drum group to help ease into my B section. So just keep in mind if something seems a little boring or you need help with a transition, and automating something could be a great way to fix the problem. Mistake number 3 was not layering my sounds. So when I first started, I didn't know what layering was. And basically it's taking different sounds that will mesh well together and kind of stacking them on top of each other to create more complex sounds. And so when I first started, I would make a piano part and it would just be piano and that was that. For this one, I have this electric piano and it sounds nice on its own, but when we add this pad, it suddenly sounds more full, more interesting, more unique. And mistake number 4, bad sound selection. And this is really one of the things that will greatly improve your beats if you can learn to pick sounds that mesh well together. And I'll share a couple of the tips I look for when I'm trying to layer my sounds. First thing I look for is the sound doing something different than the other sounds. So say I have a pad that's kind of ambient and sustaining in the background. I don't really usually want to add the same thing. I don't want to add another pad. I usually want to add something that's going to add some interest, so maybe a plucky sound. The next thing I look for is, are they occupying different areas of the frequency spectrum? So if we have two sounds that are super like low in the bass range, they're going to clash and it's going to become muddy. So I usually try and find sounds that maybe fill different areas to kind of fill up the frequency spectrum rather than trying to stack them all in one area. And the third thing that kind of goes with finding different areas of the frequency spectrum is they should need like minimal EQ. Like if you need to do like 5 EQs of different cuts and boosts and, you know, all this stuff to make the sounds fit together, that's probably not a good choice. Because if you have two sounds that sound pretty good together when you're listening to them without any EQ, and they just need minimal EQ to really fit together, then that's probably a good choice. So real quick to kind of demonstrate, I'll play this layer of chords that I have. This is from my single Sunrise Thoughts. It's streaming everywhere. Shameless self-plug if you'd like to stream it. And basically, I have these 3 sounds working together. So I have this piano playing, which has a little bit of attack to it on the transients. This pad, kind of for that ambience in the background, which if I take it out, you can hear that it's really missing. That piano just feels empty without it. And the last thing I have is this kind of string sound, which is filling up all of those higher frequencies. And every single EQ on these is basically just this band pass. So I'm not doing a whole bunch of notching out, not any crazy EQ. They're all just sitting really nicely with each other and really adding something. All right, if you've made it this far and you've enjoyed the video, please, please, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe. Leave me a comment. Really, really appreciate it. Mistake number 5 was not utilizing Ableton's really, really great MIDI effects. Ableton has some really great MIDI effects built into it. If you've seen like any of my other videos, you know I always use the velocity effect, which, just a quick example, this piano kind of sounds like trash because it's harsh and it sounds horrible. Turn this on. It sounds more human and beautiful. It's great. Another great MIDI tool that Ableton has built in is the Groove Pool. And I feel like this is really underutilized. I didn't really understand what it was or what it did until fairly recently, which is kind of sad. But this is really great, you know, especially for lo-fi and stuff where you're looking to add swing and kind of humanization to your drums in particular. So I have this really simple 2-bar drum loop that I've just drawn in with the pencil. So no velocity changes, no swing, no groove, everything is super quantized. So it sounds pretty horrible. It just sounds like a robot playing. So if we come in here to the groove section, there's basically a bunch of different grooves that we can drop onto our MIDI track. And it kind of tells you what the flavor is. So there's cha-cha, dance hall, disco, funk. Usually for lo-fi hip-hop, I'm going to come down here to the hip-hop. And this late eighths is one of my favorite. We're using eighth notes here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to go ahead and drop it right here where it says groove. And then you'll get this box that pops up. So the timing, I'm going to leave it 100%. Velocity, I'll just leave where it is as well. And so now if we play this with this groove put in here, it sounds like this. And so if I come here to this little arrow, basically that's the commit button. So if I press it, it's going to get rid of that, and it's basically made this permanent, that groove. So if we come in here, we can see what it's done. It's moved these off the grid just slightly, so everything is kind of swung and gives it that more human feel, and also it's changed the velocity. So all of the brighter ones are a higher velocity, and the lower velocities are the darker colored ones. And so if you want, you can come in here and actually manually change some of this back if you want, or just mess around with it. But it's a really, really great way to easily create more of a human feel without going in and manually changing each velocity. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully some of those tips were helpful. If they were, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you're not, leave me a comment. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.